All right, we are live.
Thank you, Molly. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the summer edition of the CTE Committee Meeting. Appreciate everyone joining us this morning. Today, we're going to really focus pretty much entirely on our expert review team implementation plan. We'll have at the end, Richard Kincaid has been kind enough to come prepared to share an update on the Perkins State budget and what's happening there. But the bulk of the meeting is really going to focus on this expert review team implementation plan. And just to remind everyone, why do we have expert review teams? Well, we are here trying to do a pretty big, bold thing. Having, our overarching goal of having 45% of Maryland high school graduates complete a registered apprenticeship, high school level of registered apprenticeship, or earn another industry recognized credential. This is an audacious goal and requires all kinds of different thinking and approaches for our schools, our districts, our counties, et cetera. So the expert review teams are really designed to help support that work, both understand what's happening LEA by LEA, uncover where are their barriers and what are the issues that we as a committee and other stakeholders need to look at and really think about how we address and how we remove barriers for the LEAs. And then also surface best practices, things that are working really well, and help to disseminate those ideas to other LEAs across the state. So I really think this part of our work is critical, because this is where all of the magic happens, right? At the in the schools, in the LEAs. So I'm excited about what we have planned for this next school year here. Before we dive in, I just want to check, Molly, can you do a quick roll call and make sure that we have a quorum here?
Absolutely. The members that we have present are Chair Myra Norton, Dr. Donald Boyd, Brian Cabey, Sharnetta Young-Callahan, Secretary Coker, Matt Holloway, Secretary Wu. So we do have a quorum present.
Great, thank you, Molly. Okay, before we get to the fun stuff, let's get the business out of the way. So the first thing we need to do is to approve the agenda for today's meeting. So if I could have a motion to approve the agenda, that would be fabulous.
So moved.
Thank you, Matt. And can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. The agenda is approved. And then the second order of business is to approve the minutes from our April 10th meeting. So I know that everyone's received them in advance and has had a chance to review. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Okay, I'm going to take Matt as the motion, and I think I saw Secretary Wu chime in as well.
Second,
So
yeah.
that as the second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, awesome. Now that that's handled, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to walk us through the next items on the agenda, share some updates on staffing and progress on the work plan, et cetera. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Norton. And a couple of updates we wanted to feature here, and not just in your brief leadership update via email ahead of this meeting. First, really excited to announce, for those of you who haven't had a chance to meet them yet or weren't at our June board meeting, our new Senior Director, Shamara Bowens, and our new Program Manager, Kathleen Swanson-Palmer, two new faces you're seeing on the screen today. And I know Shamara and the team are working on setting up times to connect with all of our committee members, get to know you all better, as we dive in on the work plan I'll talk about here in just a moment for the fiscal year that we just started, actually. So we're really happy to have them on the team. They both started a little over a month ago now. Time's really flying. And they bring a ton of wonderful expertise and background in CTE and other areas of education and workforce development and communications, a really great skill set bringing onto the team to support this important work. I also wanted to mention 2 vacancies on our team. John Strickland is now serving as assistant principal at Easton High School in his home county out in Talbot County. And that means that our CTE ERT manager position is vacant. So we're talking about this deployment plan with a little uncertainty about what future staff resources will look like, but knowing that this team is going to be prepared to carry out the plan one way or another, even if that position remains vacant for a period of time. We also still have a vacancy for our senior policy analyst. Many of you may have seen in the news reporting on a hiring freeze that's gone into effect. So we are still navigating what that's going to mean for these 2 positions going forward. But like I said, the work plan I'll kind of preview here in the next couple slides, and this deployment plan we're talking about today are taking the current capacity into consideration and assuming that this is the team that's going to staff these efforts to get this done. And congratulations to our new team members. Okay. Yes, thanks, Myra. Okay, so I wanted to provide a quick snapshot of progress to date. We're midway through 2025. We just kicked off a new fiscal year. And this group's been plenty busy. And now with new staff capacity on board, excited to really accelerate some of our work. Earlier this year, you all have finalized a new statewide framework for career and technical education, right on the heels of approving really foundational cornerstone policies defining high school level of a registered apprenticeship and industry recognized credentials for blueprint goals. The framework and those policies go into effect this coming school year. So for this deployment plan we're talking about, we're actually going to really be able to start seeing how some of these initial steps are being taken now that the policies are all in effect. We've also spent certainly some staff time working with the AIB on updating our implementation plan for fiscal years 24 through 27, and have finally kind of finished that process with them with some of their feedback incorporated. This group's also designed and issued a really exciting Perkins Reserve Grant opportunity. So we'll be getting applications in, I think, at the end of this month, and making and announcing selections next month. So we'll kind of follow up at the end of this meeting in the hopes that you all will be able to help participate in some of that review process. And this summer and into fall, we're going to be working on developing and releasing career counseling guidance, as well as student and career coach feedback surveys with support from Jobs for the Future and that partnership that was introduced in our April committee meeting. That's going to be a pretty important undertaking. That's kind of stepping into some required functions the AIB has asked this committee to take on as kind of the vision and framework setting body for the career counseling program statewide, and to support coordination with our partners, including MSDE and the Maryland Workforce Association of local workforce boards, to really kind of design and refine professional development and program implementation. We're finalizing the deployment plan for our expert review teams, hopefully today, pending discussion. And on the next slide, a preview for some of the work ahead, looking into late summer and early fall. Continue our expert review team visits, beginning to actually map and publish high demand career pathways, including the required credentials or apprenticeship pathway opportunities in collaboration with our agency partners. That's really a sort of foundational effort for the board overall, and something that's really important to the work this committee does and helps us meet some of our required functions, both as a committee and as a full workforce board. And these will be valuable tools and resources that our partners across education at all levels and workforce development can use. And of course, we'll want to be engaging members in those processes. And my team kind of did something sneaky here on this next one. Under the annual report, quite a few bullets that really summarize big work, major undertakings that we're really going to need our committee members to help us dig in on. One is recommendations around agency budget proposals related to career technical education. This represents one of the required functions of this committee that we have not had staff capacity to fully support in prior years. And similarly for these next two, updating the annual targets to reach that 45% goal by 2030 to 31, and really doing more to assess progress on the way. And finally, providing recommendations on statutory, regulatory, budgetary, other structural changes that might be needed to address challenges in the evolving CTE system. And Myra spoke really well before about how that is one of the core purposes of these expert review team visits we're talking about today, is surfacing what some of those needs may be so that we can begin to work with our local partners to think about solutions that the state can help implement. For the end of the year, we'll also be submitting a career coaching best practices report with some recommendations to the AIB, the legislature, and the governor's office. JFF is also supporting us on that line of work. And then as we round out end of year into early 2026, we'll be kind of doing our second round of the industry recognized credential review and approval process with the committee that you all did this past year for the first time. So we have a lot of work for the next 6 months outlined here, a lot of really deep work that's going to require a high level of engagement and intention. We wanted to preview this for you today so that in collaboration with our chair, our team can follow up in the coming weeks and months with you all on specific opportunities to really dig in on particular lines of effort so we can leverage your expertise and insights really effectively to help us design and conduct this work. Myra, is there anything that you'd add that I missed?
No, I think you did a great overview, and I just want us to keep anchoring on one, we should celebrate the work that's already been done, but there's a lot ahead of us. So just want to make sure everyone on the committee is kind of dialed into what we need to be working on in the coming months. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, and I believe I can turn, oh, this is me too, actually, I'm sorry. Okay, so diving into our deployment plan, as Chair Norton touched on earlier, the purpose of the visits, if you can go to the next slide. The purpose of these visits are kind of rooted in two things, really developing an understanding and ability to assess what's working well, what's not, how we're progressing on blueprint goals and implementing the CTE framework this body approved at the beginning of the year, and developing solutions, taking some of the challenges and figuring out how we can resolve them, remove blockers in expanding career technical education opportunities, including apprenticeships and industry recognized credentials, and really doing that in a data and information sort of really informed way. And we do that through the items on the next slide. These are kind of the key components and requirements of expert review teams, sort of summarizing what's articulated in statute for these teams to do around monitoring, assessment, reporting, technical assistance, that kind of support back to local education agencies, fiscal accountability and compliance. That includes, in the future and future phases of deployment, really advising the AIB on funding decisions if we're not seeing the progress or prioritization of some of those blueprint goals and some of the aspects of the Maryland CTE framework. And then again, that continuous improvement piece that we've touched on earlier. Any questions kind of on the purpose, what the basic kind of functions of these teams are? I know you all also had some time to read the draft plan and provide some feedback, but want to pause here for any questions.
I just want to underscore, Rachel, that I think it's really important that every one of us participate in at least one of these expert review team visits, if not more. So I just want to underscore that, this is a new thing. And I think it's our responsibility to really lean in and give thought to what's how do we iterate on what's already done.
Thank you. And I think that's important to recognize too. I absolutely, the commitment to have every committee member participate in at least one this coming school year. We'll be doing, I believe it's 11, team quote, tell me if I'm misquoting, or is it 13 this year? Between 11 and 13 in the coming school year, all across the state. And so a lot of opportunity to hopefully find one that can work with your schedule and where you're based. And even though we have a plan in place, we're going to keep iterating just like we did this past year. So as you're participating, you'll be able to provide us with really direct and concrete feedback on things like the agenda and the questions we're asking and all of those things. So thank you, committee members, in advance. And we're going to be working to get a schedule kind of locked in and shared so you can start signing up and getting things on calendars well in advance. Okay. All right, next slide. Just a kind of quick recap on the phased approach that this body sort of developed and approved starting in really 2023 into 2024. There was a pilot phase in the 23 to 24 school year, really just to try a couple things out. There were 2 visits conducted during that time, again, that were very iterative. It really focused on understanding what's going to help us evaluate progress more than actually developing concrete recommendations. We're now in phase 1. We're about to enter the second year of phase 1, which is focused on a little bit more evaluation of progress, really building out how we do that, how we collect data. You'll see some themes around that in this sort of year 2 of phase 1 plan. And starting to define phase 2 targets and protocol will be something we address this coming year as well as we get ready for the next phase of work. We're also going to be doing more to develop recommendations and strategies to address challenges. And actually the Perkins Reserve grant that the opportunity that we designed and issued together last month is a perfect first example of taking some early learnings and applying them to opportunities to resource some solutions. So in phase 2, in 2026 to 2028 school years, we're going to be just really, I think, building out where the assessment, recommendation development, and technical assistance coordination with our partners, that's really going to be where phase 2 accelerates heavily. And then phase 3, the kind of final few years leading up to the 2030-31 school year, when the 45% goal is intended to be reached, we're going to just keep iterating and improving on these processes and really doing that ongoing evaluation, best practice dissemination, challenge identification, recommendation development around policy, and so forth. So that's going to, as Myra kind of pointed out at the beginning, this, when we think about the future and the kind of indefinite future past the 2030-31 school year, these expert review teams really become sort of the core of the work of this committee and the kind of constant feedback loop that guides the committee's work in governing and supporting the system. Any questions about kind of this phased approach? I know there's more detail in the plan as well. Okay. All right, we can move on. And by the way, we're just kind of setting you guys up for some discussion here, so going to move through the rest of this pretty quickly. So these are some of the kind of key pieces of information that phase 1 has been really focused on gathering. Where are LEAs so far in implementing the blueprint? What's already promising, some of the common challenges we're already surfacing, and changes needed, and technical assistance needed. And that technical assistance piece, I think, like I said, is in another area where in this next year of the deployment plan, we're going to really be digging in more. Next slide. So in terms of planning for the next year, these are a few highlights of kind of what we're doing in this next year around refining data collection needs, analyzing ways to remove barriers, and especially to improve access and equity in the CTE system. Internally, kind of looking inward at the process, we're going to be really streamlining and improving the post-visit report process, making that way more of a consistent and valuable experience, hopefully for our LEA partners, and then starting to work with you all in early 2026 to strategize on phase 2 development and rollout. Next slide, please. This kind of captures our visits to date. I have my numbers backwards. It's 13 that we visited so far, 13 LEAs visited, and 23 schools within those 13 LEAs. So it's a pretty impressive statewide total in terms of numbers of members and programs that we've looked at, but more to do. Some insights gained through this first year, some really noticeable strengths. No surprise that the teacher expertise and really deep commitment to developing industry expertise among their students, and to really setting clear expectations for their students around what's needed in this career, in this job field, and what you need to prepare yourself to do, or how you need to operate in a workplace. The commitment and passion around that work was just so evident. And like I said, no surprise, but just really, really impressive. Participation among students and teachers in career and technical student organizations and things like national competitions have actually, really provided some very valuable and motivating opportunities for students who are participating in CTE education. And so that was a new learning for the expert review teams as well. And of course, really validating the fact that, and hearing from students, from educators, from counselors, things that the data show us, right, on a national level, that hands-on learning experiences truly do lead to engaged students who are not just engaged in their hands-on learning experiences, but also in their academic learning as well. So really underscoring kind of what that story of the value add is for career and technical education. Some challenges, again, some of these won't be surprises. Transportation barriers to work sites or to where related instruction is taking place, if it's not taking place at the institution, at the high school. Some mixed quality and coaching given to students, and partly because of the ratio of career coaches to students. There's, these coaches have a huge caseload in many districts. And so there's been kind of mixed implementation. That's something I know that this group has talked about as well, but it really has surfaced from some of the focus groups taking place in districts. The scheduling problems, scheduling conflicts resulting in absenteeism, tardiness when it comes to whether it's workplace experiences or participation in their coursework, or even just limiting how many teachers are available or what students can participate in if there aren't enough teachers and enough scheduling slots to make the opportunities work for students. On that note, there's a lot of constraints on the career and technical education system, and these are going to be really hard challenges to resolve, partly because they're very expensive challenges to resolve, among other things. They're very complex as well. Staffing, facility and equipment constraints. All of this results in wait lists. There are a lot more students interested in general in most districts, a lot more students interested in the types of opportunities that we're looking to expand than there are seats available for them right now. And then finally, a lack of kind of clear transition ramps. It's hard for students to transition from one CTE pathway to another in some cases, especially, if they don't necessarily have as much hands-on coaching around how to make that transition if they're not engaged or interested, or they just want a different path than the one that they've started down. And so we've been seeing some promising practices emerge in how students are supported in making those choices and transitions, but that's also kind of an inconsistency and something that we can improve overall. Secretary Wu.
Thanks, Rachel. And thanks so much for this. I had a question. I apologize to you and the chair if this is not the right moment for it, but as I was reading the plan and looking at this, something that I know maybe it's just greater clarification in the plan. And I know we also have some newer members of the committee. It might be worth just going over this again. Yeah. This focus and these visits is with 2 schools where there is a CTE program, but the blueprint goal is broader than the CTE facilities. And I know the governor has raised more than once, well, what are we doing to help? And of course, we won't meet the 45% industry recognized credential goal if we only focus on CTE. Right. So I just was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. And the career coaches, of course, is a much broader scope. Yeah. And we think about, how do internships work into that, or apprenticeships where maybe it's not part of a CTE program, but students are getting that hands-on learning and working experience through a high school level registered apprenticeship or something else. I was wondering if you could just be a little clarify that, because our visits are going to be to CTE programs, but it seems like also a huge important part of the work is how are we reaching students who are not either enrolled in CTE or at schools where that isn't there, but they need other programming options.
That's a great point. And I think based on some of your initial feedback, we've made some clarifications in the updated draft, and I think there's perhaps some more we can make. And it's right to point out that the scope of the CTE expert review teams, at least at the moment, is there's sort of a Venn diagram, right? Because this is looking at how are some of these opportunities being integrated per the blueprint's goals into career and technical education itself. And then there's the broader question of the goal applies to more students than those that are or will be in CTE pathways. And so on that latter point, and these are the clarifications we can maybe take a look at in the plan too. One piece of sort of improving data collection this coming year is going to be attached to that work to develop student and career coaching, perhaps surveys for other audiences too, right? To make sure we're capturing what's happening with students that are not participating in these pathways. And another piece is we've kind of elevated where in the deployment visits, in the expert review team visits, we're engaging with LEA administrators and leadership to understand what's happening in their LEA more broadly and really dive in a little bit more and use the data sort of in a more active way with the expert review team members, even before the visit, so they can really take a look at the numbers, ask the questions that surface from the numbers particular to that LEA broadly before kind of really zooming in on just what's happening with the CTE pathways. That's what we have kind of in the plan right now. I think it's really valid. I know we've got some discussion happening today too, but really valid to ask how else should we be making sure we're developing a sense of what is happening or can and should be happening for other students.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And we will actually talk about the visit structure here a little bit in a moment too, just kind of like a quick snapshot. So we can go to the next slide. We've kind of talked through some of these considerations, so I won't spend too much time. I kind of just talked through several of these actually, so I won't spend a lot of time here. But this is just really kind of that quick snapshot of what we're thinking about for the committee and staff as we structure and conduct these visits, and then the considerations, how we're trying to improve what this means for LEAs coming out of the visits in this plan in front of you today. Next slide, please. Here's kind of a snapshot of some of the updates to the plan. So kind of beefing up some of the school tour and classroom observations. The classroom observations are required in statute as part of these visits. And so kind of improving and just developing some of the time spent in classrooms, kind of seeing what this looks like. Having some minimum requirements around focus groups to make sure there's at least some level of sufficient time, all within the context of a one-day visit, but some time really to dig into questions on focus groups. I'll jump to the bottom actually, where also kind of in this conversation talking about, do we have the right focus groups, right? We want to get some feedback today from you all to make sure that it's, right to be the balance that we have of time with students, others, teachers, LEA administrators, like I mentioned a moment ago, and other school-based staff, because we want to be kind of hitting all these different levels of feedback, but also really getting feedback that's going to paint as full a picture as possible on a visit like this. Extending pre-visit orientation for expert review team members. We know that is a greater ask of time, but that is to really allow for this next point, reviewing data more carefully, including during that orientation. During that orientation, the LEA administrators and CTE leadership are present and part of that conversation to talk about their work, and they'll be present for questions about the data that's being reported by the LEA so that the expert review team is going in with that kind of broader picture of what's happening in the district. And then a new addition in this latest draft of the plan is a post-visit debrief and feedback opportunity of some sort with those LEA leadership before the report is finalized. Every visit results in a report delivered back to the LEA. But before that report is finalized, we are going to be formalizing how we both share with them what the expert review team's observations and recommendations are, and also hear their feedback on what's resonating, what might not be the complete picture, as one kind of final opportunity to do all of that before we finalize the report that's officially delivered back. And then finally, am I back? Sorry, everyone. I don't know what's happening with my connection this morning. That's nice. If you heard me say, dang it, I'm glad I didn't say anything else. So also kind of we've been looking at strengths and challenges, but also kind of really formalizing how we ask the expert review teams to consider external factors, not just strengths and challenges within the school that they're looking at or the room they're looking at or the district even, but what some of those external factors are, like policy, like economic climate, other things that might be impacting what we're seeing. Team, I'll invite you to surface anything I might have missed or that you'd like to double click on before I move on.
I think you captured everything. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Great. Good news. Okay. And on the next slide, a kind of snapshot of what a visit looks like pre, during, and post. I've touched on some of these points, so won't go through every piece here. Again, you'll see some additions relative to what was happening in some parts of the first phase, even in some parts of last year. Even last year, throughout the year, there was some iterating on the visit structure as we continue to learn and get feedback from folks participating. And so as you take up Myra's commitment, call to action for participating in at least one, hey, maybe even a couple expert review team visits in the coming school year, this is what you can expect in the 2-hour orientation and kind of dialogue with LEA leadership beforehand, during the visit, the full day, typically 2 schools, as Secretary Wu mentioned, and then post-visit, really kind of being engaged in dialogue together with the team, with LEA leadership, before we finalize our final post-visit report, which every expert review team member also has a chance to kind of review personally. Any questions or comments before we jump into discussion? We'll have questions for you, but any questions or initial comments on this kind of snapshot of visit structure? Okay, well, we can really get into the fun part now. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think these are some of the questions our team had that we wanted to kind of tee up for discussion. And Chair Norton, I welcome you to chime in with where you'd like us to start. But for those of you who have been able to participate in visits, would love to hear what's been most valuable and maybe what would have improved what we learned from the visits.
I mean, I'd kind of like to go back to Secretary Wu's point, which I think was a really good one. And to be totally transparent, I hadn't really put that together. And I'm curious, I don't know, Richard, you may have thoughts on this, but like, how do we think about reaching students who are not in CTE programs? Like, is the goal to have more students matriculate into CTE programs, or to provide avenues to apprenticeships, et cetera, that may be outside of CTE programs? I hadn't really thought about that, to be totally honest. And I
And
thought
I
it was a
think-
great point.
I think the answer is yes and yes to your questions. So a couple of things, that the data tell us. First is we lose about 65% of participants between course 1 and course 2. That's pretty significant, but it's also not out of line with national averages, right? And so do you want to level set that expectation? What that means number-wise, though, is there's about 60,000 students every year that choose to do something else from the program that they started. We can do a better job, I think, at retention, and simply retaining CTE students gets us to the 45% pretty quickly, and you could actually do it with the 130,000 or so students that choose to participate every year, and then retaining the 65% that choose to go somewhere else. Systemically, there's a couple of ways that you can help to meet that. First is the collaboration with all of the different state agencies that Rachel talked about around career counseling. We know that if students are able to devise well-crafted plans, in middle school and revisit those often, and the school community is engaged to make sure that the roadmap that students are designing is going to get them to where they want to go. Oftentimes, when you have a plan of where you're headed, you're more likely to get to where you want to be, right? And I think this is one value that the career counseling piece will offer. The second part of this is as we are redesigning the CTE system, and this includes the work that we've talked with many of you about over the past year on the core plus flex model, to sort of standardize how courses and the system is structured statewide, coupling that with course standards so that we have assurances of where students need to be at the end of each course that then lead to an industry recognized credential, dual enrollment, advanced academics, and a career connected learning experience like that gold standard of apprenticeship. When you design the system in a way that provides maximum student agency and is intentionally outcome based, then I think you begin capturing so many more of those students as well, like into that system. And the information from the ERT expert review team, visits have been instrumental in sort of helping inform the next steps that we need to take as a state agency. And I am really curious, the data moving forward, to see how we are shoring up those gaps. Final thing I'll say is we have to also look outside of traditional CTE programs. And so you'll remember about a year and a half ago, we had a CTE Innovation Fund that was provided, with dollars from the state that allowed us to connect areas outside of CTE and provide opportunities for students to earn credentials and career connected learning experiences. We did this through comprehensive arts programs. And so students that traditionally have gone into fine arts, performing arts, and in particular like sound design and, tech theater is low-hanging fruit for us. We were able to design CTE-like pathways that capture students that aren't in the traditional CTE system, and give them additional credentialing and career-connected learning experiences. And so we have some great implementations of that. I believe Somerset County and Worcester County are two examples that come to my head right now of how that has worked well and how we can begin scaling and implementing those CT-like programs across the state. But the answer is yes and yes, Myra.
Yeah, and Richard, that's really helpful. And just for context for the group, it's accurate. Later in this meeting, they'll be reviewing, and you'll be walking us through the next upcoming year's Perkins CTE budget. And so, in the context of this conversation, it's important to remember that that's really funding for the CTE system, which we're acknowledging limitations there relative to the big blueprint goals. And so, that's part of why the type of fund, like what you just pointed out, was really instrumental. Right. Okay.
Yeah, so it seems like, and I'm sure we're already doing this, but when we talk to LEA leaders, that we really want to understand how they're thinking about these different populations and what are they doing today to tackle retention, to tackle this sort of outcomes-based approach that Richard just talked about, for even for those that may not be in traditional CTE programs. Because understanding that kind of across the state, where are folks, and the other thing that from a data perspective, I know we're gathering sort of what is the growth in apprenticeships, LEA by LEA, what is the growth in industry recognized credential attainment. But it would also be good to break that out in terms of how much of that growth. I mean, I imagine we sort of know the answer to this. The bulk of that growth today is coming from CTE programs, but are we seeing any growth coming outside? Are there any instances of that?
I think those are great questions. And if valuable, I think when we kind of vote on the deployment plan, we're kind of keeping track of potential edits or clarifications or refinements to it that can be part of that vote. I think I'm hearing that it'd be useful to just make sure we find the right place to articulate, one, that data breakout that you're talking about, so we can kind of understand what's already happening. And then two, when we're talking to LEA leadership in the pre-visit orientation, potentially in on-site focus groups, and certainly at the end as well, understanding how they're thinking about those questions you just articulated, we can kind of make sure that's clear in the plan. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay.
What about, for those of you who have participated in the visits, is there anything you want to, that you say like this was particularly valuable or helpful? I think that would be great to hear from other folks.
Well, good morning, everybody. It was so good just to hear all of this data being captured from the expert review team and Dr. Boyd, the Director of Teaching and Learning. But I think what is of great value is just including all of the stakeholder voices, right? But I think what can be improved in this process is the random selection of participants. And with that, you get a clearer picture, of what's happening in the system. And so there's this level of, unbiased, when we have different voices in it and we don't just have one person. But our career coach is on today, and I'm sure she's happy to see what was captured in our expert review team. But as you were speaking earlier about some of the challenges and some of the strengths that we have encountered, my question is, what can the Department of Labor do to provide or to assist with the age barrier in rural healthcare, which prohibits the career exposure for our students? And we know that transportation was one of the barriers. And one of the goals for this committee is to improve access and to provide students with, experiences that they will be able to engage with CTE. So again, how can we and how can the Department of Labor mitigate this barrier for them to have this exposure?
Yeah. And Dr. Boyd, I'll just quickly say thank you for both of those observations. And I know I'm really excited to see, we're hoping some LEAs apply to our Perkins Reserve Grant opportunity in the transportation category. And I'm really excited to see what ideas they have for these challenges, because I think some of the answers may be similar in various jurisdictions and some might be really different. And there's, I think it's valid to point out that this committee, as we're thinking about what recommendations we're putting in our final annual report, we can really package up a lot of information and ideas and things we want to, maybe push for as a committee. What else is out there that we could be looking at around transportation should be an area. And I think there's gonna be a lot of sort of asynchronous offline small group work that happens between now and that December 1st annual report deadline for us to kind of collaborate on what some solutions could look like. So we're gonna keep you in mind for that piece for sure. And I think then for this deployment plan, I'm also hearing, well, actually, I guess there were three things. For this deployment plan specifically, You mentioned a random sample, and that's something we've talked about and kind of struggled with a little bit. I'll be candid, is, we know that the districts we're visiting are kind of able to select who we talk to in focus groups, right? So I'm curious, from your vantage point, if you have an idea of what would it look like, and how would we go about generating a more random sampling of teachers, students, what have you, in our focus groups, so those can provide as much value to us as possible as well.
Absolutely. I think just sending out a comprehensive needs assessment and see who would like to participate in this as well. Also, getting a random selection of students or people who are in the community. And I think this will help the process as well. People who work within the industry, people who work outside of the industry. I think this is important, that we have all voices to the table if we want to make well-informed decisions. So I think that's something that we would need to do, or just send out surveys to say, would you be willing to participate in an expert review team? And then from that, right, we gather a list and say, this will be our expert review team. And with that, beyond that, you said something earlier, when we have these visits, it's important that our feedback is very specific, right? It's accurate and it's timely. If we don't get it in a timely manner, then we can adjust to the feedback, and we'll continue with systems that are broken and not working. So again, sending out a survey and just getting as many voices as you can in the process.
That's I think something I'm hearing, maybe a third sort of edit to the plan before submission, potentially, that would be part of this vote. That would be, I don't know if we'll land the exact answer yet that we can say on paper, this is how we're going to do it. But I think we should say we're going to be exploring how to generate kind of more random samplings, breadth of a sampling among our focus group participants for visits and among expert review team members. You named some categories that we do include in visits, but the process of identifying who's going to participate is a little bit, perhaps not as comprehensive as it could be. And I saw Dr. Boyd and Brian, both of you, come off mute, so please jump in.
Yeah. So a couple things. One, just to follow up on Dr. Boyd there, when we do an apprenticeship audit from MATC every other year of every program, we do interviews of the apprenticeship students, or the auditor does. And they request people, they request or they look at the list broken down by race and pick people from different races to interview. I don't know if that's part of the rules of the affirmative action plan or not, or if that's just an easy way to make sure you get a diverse group. But that's how they do it. I mean, I wonder if, but the thing with these kids is that, you kind of maybe want people that are willing, because, we're sitting there, it's 5 people sitting across the table interviewing them. They might be a little nervous of that. Maybe we lower that and break it down to just 1 or 2 doing an interview of 1 or 2 students. Maybe that makes them a little more comfortable. I don't know. I mean, that's something that you'd have to work through, but maybe that's a way that we could get more diversity and not handpick students where maybe you get the answers you want instead of the answers you need. The thing that I noticed, and I probably did as many of the, I bet there was only one person that did more of these than me. But and they were excellent. I loved going to them. I loved going to the CTE schools. What I noticed is probably a positive and a negative. And it's with the counselors and the coaches. There were schools where they were awesome and they really helped the kids out. There were schools where they weren't as awesome. And it wasn't because they were doing a bad job at times. I don't know, because it was new, right? This whole system is new. They didn't even know necessarily what they were supposed to be doing, especially the ones we did early in the year. As the year went through, I think that they got more of an idea of what their job really was. And I think that's coaches more than counselors. I think, Richard, you can tell me, coaches are newer than counselors, right? And I don't know, to fix that might be having group sessions where when they're doing, their days where they're advancing their own knowledge, that they all get together or something. I don't know. But them being able to work together, being able to know, I guess that's what their job is, make sure we know that they know what their job is. and then getting them together, because the ones that were excellent were excellent. I mean, and they really helped the kids. The ones that struggled at doing that weren't as much help because they were struggling. And I think that that would really help. There were a few that we came across that were, I used to run in 25 years ago when I was first a apprenticeship director. I ran into a lot of people in the counseling world who didn't want to send their kids to construction. Everybody had to go to college. We've gotten out of that. There's still a few stragglers. And if we could weed them out, that'd probably be good. And that's a terrible thing to say, because you're maybe talking about costing somebody their job, but we don't need people that do that anymore, to be frank.
Richard, I see your hand.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So one of the things that, and this may be sort of a business rule after policy is passed, sort of consideration, but I think there are two things that I'm hearing. One is sort of how the system is being operationalized, and then how the system is being sort of intentionally designed and built, right? And so every 2 years, this coming spring will be the next iteration of the comprehensive local needs assessment process. And so the Perkins federal law requires that all of our LEA programs on at least a 2-year rolling cycle evaluate from top to bottom every single program that they offer within the LEA. And these are data-driven conversations that have a required group of members that must be part of the process. And that includes instructors and counselors and post-secondary partners and workforce members. And the law is very prescriptive on who must be there. And so perhaps this is an opportunity where, when we are talking about how programs are being designed, how programs are being created or sunset, like, this is maybe the best place for that conversation. Because I think all of the right people are at the table, and the data is current and relevant to that process, right? It's that comprehensive local needs assessment that then drives the work for the next 2 years of not only implementation, but also their Perkins local application, right? So everything, the way that we've designed this, is everything in the local application must tie back to the recommendations that came about through the comprehensive local needs assessment process, right? So I think that's a space for that. And then when expert review teams are going into schools, it's then looking at the operationalization of those things as it relates to state goals and priorities, right? And I think if there's sort of that clean sort of separation, what that may help do is get the very specific actionable information that CTE committee is looking for. But I think it also helps to reduce the burden of data reproduction and, talking about why programs exist. Like, if we just put those conversations in the right places, then I think everybody gets what they want with the least amount of burden.
Yeah. And Richard, that's a great point. And so I think what I'm hearing is there's also a place we can acknowledge, even in, and maybe it's in this plan, maybe it's something that we know we're working into our phase 2 plan that starts not this coming school year, but the following school year, after this process in spring that you've outlined is done, which I know we've talked about, this time around, we're going to be collaborating. CT committee, that wasn't in my work plan that I showed you through the end of this calendar year, but collaborating with the committee on, and using that data and information from that process going into the next round of, the next 2 years of deployment, of expert review team deployment, to kind of streamline that for everyone, including the LEAs, if I'm hearing you right. Okay. Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, there are two things that occur to me. Brian, I really appreciated the point you were making about career coaching. And I think this is a big piece of what we have to figure out as a state, like how we're going to evolve that work. And I know that's a big part of what Jobs for the Future will be helping us think through, because it's not a consistent there is no consistent approach right now from what I.
That's right. Yeah.
And then the other, so I just wanted to say, yeah, +1 to that, Brian. And then one of the questions you have on here is what types of data should we prioritize? I'm gonna speak more sort of at 50,000 feet, like philosophically. To me, it feels like a lot of the expert review team visits and the reports that come after are very qualitative in nature, which you need that qualitative data. But I think we would be better served to really get a foundation of quantitative data that is captured consistently to the extent that we can. Data is always, this is an inherent problem everywhere, but we should really try to figure out what is the, so for example, simple things like how many students are there in this LEA? How many of them are in CTE programs? What is their retention rate for CTE programs? How many students are participating in apprenticeships? And then for all those things, what is that trend over time? How many have completed other industry recognized credentials? What is that trend over time? Then when you have the quantitative data, the qualitative data can help to interpret or understand if we see growth rates, and we should look at that not just in terms, we should not just look at that in terms of raw numbers. We should look at that in terms of patterns, right? And how what is happening, because different LEAs are of different sizes, and we've got schools that are, all of those things. But I mean, that is the beauty of quantitative data, is you can actually take into account those variances. So I guess I just want to encourage us to really make sure, and now that Edris is here, really make sure we are being super thoughtful about what is the quantitative data that we're gathering, so that the qualitative data that we get can help to inform, why is this LEA seeing much larger growth in this area than the rest? Now the qualitative insights might help us figure that out. But I would just hate for us to rely on qualitative data to accurately assess what's working, what's not, where the opportunities are, et cetera.
Right, and I just want to underscore what you said, right? You have to have a measure of both of them, the qualitative and the quantitative as well. And as you're giving that aerial view of using numbers, we have to have some type of baseline data, right? And then from that, then we build upon it with our qualitative data. But even with the qualitative data, we know that there's a bit of skewness in it because it's coming from a person's perspective, right? And so, as you said earlier, it will be that qualitative data that will inform our decisions, right? And it will explain the phenomena of what's happening in that particular district. Why are there gaps? Why are there disparities or discrepancies? So thank you for underscoring that, because you have to have a measure of both of them to make decisions with this team.
Thank you. And I think one thing we can do, I know that this next year's plan really beefs some of this up, right? Like the data points we're at least trying to collect, you mentioned it accurately. There's some inconsistency, at least for the time being, in what LEAs are kind of self-reporting. And over the prior year, before our policies went into effect, which they do this coming school year, there were also maybe some of them were measuring against our new industry recognized credential definition already, and some weren't. And so we're going to see some of that sort of organically start to become more consistent in terms of what's available to us. And we're improving how we use it. And again, especially with ETGs on board now too. And so one thing I'm noting here for the final plan we submit to the AIB is there are a couple of places where you can just say a little bit more explicitly, like we're using quantitative and qualitative data here in the orientation discussion and questions that the review team will ask of the LEA administrators, and here where we're tailoring some of the questions in focus groups or in student interviews based on what we've seen in the data, like really using it a little more intentionally. We can clarify that.
Hey, Rachel, can I just make one quick point? I think it's going to be important, knowing that, CTE committee now has, data capacity, and certainly we have on my team data capacity as well. I need to just speak out there. It's going to be critical that we coordinate on this, because most of the quantitative data that you have been speaking of, we already have.
Yeah.
Already collect. And I think the worst thing that could happen is we have all sorts of disjointed data being sliced and diced, right? Like I think
Yes.
building an intentional data model so that we are speaking the same numbers and using the same methodologies is going to be critical.
Yes. Yeah.
Data can tell whatever story you want it to tell.
Yes, it can.
And so I just want to highlight that, just the importance of that moving forward.
Absolutely. And I know Idris and some members of your team have already started working together on this, which will be valuable for all the reasons you said. And actually, I'm glad you raised that, Richard. One relatively small tweak we made in the draft is there's kind of a level of openness depending on the time of year and dialogue with the LEA for actually leveraging the data you already have, as opposed to having LEAs kind of self-report, duplicate anything for the expert review teams. And then giving them a chance, like, here's the data we've gotten from MSD. Do you have anything to add, share? And that's kind of part of the line of questioning during the orientation that expert review team members can engage in to help streamline that. Like you said, make it more as consistent as we can, streamline the process where we can, because we're already asking so much of our local partners with these visits and all the other reasons that you stated. And that's a change we made, I think, as late as yesterday or 2 days ago in the draft based on some feedback. So thank you for that. Okay. This is really great. And I think one last question we wanted to probe before we potentially have a motion to vote was the question around engaging LEA leadership in the process. We've kind of clarified and elevated, and I think probably strengthened a couple areas where they're engaged in the process now or will be kind of in the current plan. Just to quickly recap, that's in the orientation with expert review team members, which has some extended time and will include kind of, okay, we're seeing this in the data. Can you tell us more about why we're seeing this or why we're seeing that? So there's a deep dive opportunity before the visit takes place. As of right now, in the past year, some LAs included kind of focus group or kind of, group interview with leadership on site during the day of the visit. In some cases, it was midway through the day, so, we've seen some things, we have some questions before the day continues. And in some visits, based on feedback after the first handful, some visits last year did not include that as part of the day of visit. And then we also, in this current plan, we have added kind of a post-visit like debrief with that leadership group to talk about observations and reflections. The question we have is on that day of, what's the best way? Is there a value add of making sure they're engaged as a focus group or something of that nature with the expert review team during the day of visit, or do those kind of bookended before and after opportunities feel like the best way to engage their insights, ask them questions, etc.? That's really the big question that will kind of make an edit in the plan depending on the response.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, this is Sharnetta. I actually like the bookended approach. I just think about, as we lead teams, how comfortable are they talking in a group setting when the leadership is present, and will that impact how they communicate some of the issues, not necessarily the great things that are going on, but some of the issues or some of the headwinds that they're experiencing when leadership is involved in the discussion. So I personally would vote for the bookend approach, but I'd love to hear what other people think.
I think you bring up a really good point.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean,
and there was one school that we went to that the leadership actually sat in. And I wasn't even comfortable with that. They should not have been in that room with both counselors, coaches, and teachers. And the leadership was just kind of almost like a panel sitting in the back of the room. And I'm like, what the hell are they doing in there? So that, they're there in orientation. Great. If they're there at the end of the day, everybody gets together and kumbaya as we go out the door. That's great too. But for the rest of the day, I think we need to be with teachers and counselors and students by ourselves.
I think, and the only thing I would say is I'm sure we can just do this by capturing, like, during those visits, things arise that we probably want to ask LEA leadership about, to say like, well, we had this pre-visit meeting and this is what we understood to be the case, but we just heard this from students or teachers or whatever. And so that doesn't seem to jive. So how do you think about this kind of disconnect? So I just think it's really important that part of the process of capturing the feedback during the visits is we need to highlight, like, we should highlight those things that we want to make sure it's, you know, we're all human and we're going to forget that stuff. So.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that looks like in the plan, just articulating that staff will capture this type of information from expert review team members. There's a piece built in at the end for kind of like a quick, like a half-hour together debrief, like talk about some of the things you're asking essentially, but we can formalize capturing what those questions are so that in that new post-visit interaction with the LA leadership, that information's organized and we can make sure we get answers. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Okay.
To me, it does.
Great. Okay. And yeah, of course, welcome others too. Okay.
I just, your sort of last question on this slide about the transition from discovery and baseline setting to assessment, recommendations, technical assistance, et cetera. I think we just want to be super focused on making sure we're nailing like what are the baseline and what are the things that we're really going to be looking. I would hate for us to get to the end of this fiscal year and say, oh, we have a whole other body of work okay, we did all these visits, but we don't quite know what the baseline should be, or we don't quite, you know what I mean? Like, time is of the essence, I guess. And so the more we can be really, as we're, I know that in year one, you know, first time we've done this, we're kind of having to learn on the job, as it were, which, you know, hey, work-based learning, that's one of our things. But I think now we really should be starting to almost build out what is that scorecard, or whatever word we want to use. Maybe that's not the right one, but, you know, like what is that baseline? What are we going to be looking for so that we are really moving into direct support as quickly as we can, and you know, being able to make decisions and recommendations about things that fundamentally need to change to reach the goals that are in front of us.
Shamira, go ahead.
There was a question in the chat that came a couple of minutes ago from an anonymous participant, but it says, is there any programs for children with intellectual disabilities, ASD, Down syndrome, et cetera, and or physical disabilities?
And I think maybe, Richard, I don't know if you're able to answer in the chat. Before we jump to that, as we kind of do housekeeping before we kind of move to motion to vote, Myra wanted to just kind of double click and see if others have feedback on your point, kind of like, I heard you kind of mention scorecard and like whether that's a term we use or not. That's something where I think I'm hearing kind of really fine, like during this next year, we need to make sure we're building a clear sort of like structure and framework for actually just doing the like more assessment, so to speak, of progress, so that we can be moving more quickly. And I think that's something we can probably start working on and iterating early in this year, so we can actually start testing how we use it, I think is kind of what you were encouraging. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good.
And to be clear, to me, the assessment piece is so that we can
support. Yeah,
so that we know what are the biggest challenges and barriers, and we have data to support that, so that we can say these are the things we should invest in through time, resources, focus, program, et cetera.
Yep. Okay, great. That's really good. Does anyone else have kind of thoughts on this last question? Kind of how we're setting ourselves, what else we might want to be doing this year to set ourselves up for more of that kind of quick response work? Okay. I know we covered a lot. I think this is really good. Sorry, Chair Norton, go ahead.
I would just, before we move to voting on the plan, I just want to I want to ask one more time, any items of concern or anything that any of the committee members want to underscore before and just to level set with everyone, what's going to happen is we will basically, if we approve the plan with the edits that have been discussed in today's meeting, that draft will then go to the AIB for review and feedback. That's what will happen next. So any other, it doesn't have to just be the questions that are here. Were there any other areas of concern or inquiry that anyone had on the plan? Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to cover on the plan, Rachel, before we move to vote?
I don't think so. If I may, I think actually I lied. One thing, if I may capture just quickly, I'll try to summarize some of the slight edits and tweaks I heard for what we submit. So that can be part of the vote, like kind of a vote with these edits, if that works. All right. So one is to articulate that to the extent possible in the data that we're able to gather this coming year from LEAs, breaking out participation growth patterns, et cetera, in CTE versus kind of outside of CTE programming in things like apprenticeship, industry recognized credential participation. That was one point. When it comes to articulating questions that we're asking LEA administrators, weaving that in, how are you thinking about these two populations within your district, not just within your CTE system, but those outside of your CTE system, and how you can create pathways for them to access those opportunities. Making sure it's clear that focus groups will not have LEA leadership or school leadership in them, so they can be kind of safe spaces for more honest feedback. Looking at exploring opportunities and experimenting this year with how we kind of get more random samplings and a breadth of individuals among both our focus groups and our expert review team members. And within that, also thinking about how we structure the student focus groups, experimenting perhaps with smaller groups within that focus group time block on the agenda, to Brian's point, and articulating that during the end of day debrief, staff will capture questions in follow-up questions for LEA leadership for that kind of post-visit conversation with them. That's what I think I captured. Did I miss anything?
Sounds like you got it.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So the vote will be kind of with those edits in place if the committee approves the plan for submission.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion that we approve the plan with the edits that Rachel has just outlined for submission to the AIB. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Matt. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The plan with edits passes, and we'll after the team incorporates those edits, we'll submit that to the AIB and share back obviously with this group any feedback that they have or any adjustments that we need to make as a result of that feedback. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Richard, I think you're up.
Most exciting part of the presentation, let's talk Perkins FY26 budget. So next slide, please. So just want to remind folks not only of the agreement that CTE Committee and MSD has, but then also around some of the requirements and uses of Perkins before we dive into how the money is sliced and diced. So we annually review as agencies, CTE Committee staff, MSD staff, on an MOU. So this was designed about 18 months or so ago. And it describes the collaborative work between both MSD and the CTE Committee in ways that support Blueprint in particular. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a clear understanding of swim lanes. And it is designed to ensure that CTE programs are aligned with all of our state's economic development and workforce goals, while also acknowledging that when we receive money from the federal government, it is somebody else's money, and there are a ton of strings attached for required uses. And so the MOU helps us to navigate how we best align those items. Within that MOU, the CTE committee's role as delineated indicates a coordination with MSD on development of this 4-year plan that aligns to Blueprint, and then also to promote innovation in CTE through coordinating and design of the portion of Perkins Reserve grant that can help to meet some of those state priorities. And I know that there's some conversation about that reserve grant today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just as a reminder, this is the slide that we showed last year. The Carl D. Perkins Act is the governing piece of federal legislation. It's both an accountability, a programmatic sort of piece of legislation, and then also a funding mechanism. And ultimately, what this does is provide systemic dollars to prepare students for the workforce. History of Perkins is there. It was reauthorized as Perkins 5 in 2018. And as you might expect, there's currently conversations about a reauthorization again into Perkins 6. And so those are circling around federal policy circles at the moment. Congress allocates 1 programs from the year 2000 to now. The investment in CTE has not kept up with inflation at all. In fact, when you figure inflation, we are funded significantly less in 2025 than we were funded in the year 2000. And then Perkins 5 represents a number of opportunities to expand student voice, student choices in programming. It gives us the ability to seed fund new and innovative CTE programs, and then also sustain the system of CTE programs of study that are aligned with state workforce goals. Next slide. There are 9 required uses of Perkins. Not going to read through all of these details, but ultimately, and Catherine, I think you're controlling, you can just sort of cycle through these 9. Certainly look at these. This is a systemic grant. It is meant to create the right conditions for students to have a broad array of career pipelines that are aligned to the post-secondary and workforce needs of individual states. That's why Maryland's implementation will look different from Delaware's and New York's and California's, because we align it specifically to the workforce needs of the state that the grant is awarded to. And so we spend a lot of time looking at labor market data. We work with employers through our local advisory councils. We work with organizations like and agencies like Maryland Department of Labor and the CTE Committee and the Governor's Workforce Board to make sure that in MHEC, important partner to acknowledge, to make sure that our students, once they reach graduation, have every option available to them should they choose, one of the options. And this is meant to provide that entire support system for students as they are exploring and training to go into the world of work. Next slide, please. So this is our allocation for FY26, 20.8 million roughly. This year we were funded a little bit less than 200,000 fewer dollars than in FY25. This is something that impacted states nationwide. Most states saw their allocation decrease by about 1%. We've made several requests to the Department of Education as to why the decrease happened, and we have not had a response. So once we know more, we will let you know more. Within Perkins, there is a prescribed formula of how the dollars must be allocated. So most of this is not state choice. 85% of the total state allotment, so for us in FY26, that's 17.6 million, is considered pass-through. This is money that has to go directly to school systems or community colleges within the state. And so it's formula-based within our state plan. This is where the state has the decision of how much of that 85% goes either to secondary or post-secondary programs. Based on our state plan, 65% goes to our secondary programs, while 35% goes to post-secondary. On post-secondary, an important notation here, the Perkins Act indicates that you can only fund post-secondary institutions whose primary degree is an associate's degree. And so this is why four-year institutions do not qualify for the formula-based approach. I will also note that it's important for this committee and others who are listening in to pay particular attention to the Trump administration's budget for FY26 as it's moving through the process, because there is a small little detail, literally one sentence, that says the Trump administration intends to defund post-secondary CTE programming and move all of those pass-through dollars into secondary education programs, which would be a massive hit for Maryland community colleges, particularly as they are working to support our secondary programs with apprenticeship, non-degree workforce courses, and other things. The additional piece of pass-through is the reserve fund. The federal government allows us to allocate up to 15% of this pass-through amount into a reserve fund. There are several required uses for this. Ultimately, this should be used as an innovation grant. It must be allocated as a competition if it is going to be granted out, and not granted out to every recipient, right? And so if you're going to be selective, it must be competitive. In Maryland, we reserve 5%. So that amounts to about $850,000 a year. This year, we have provided an opportunity for CTE committee to distribute $500,000, so $500,000 through a competitive grant process. And that's something that hopefully each one of you will be deeply involved in, because it can provide you some really great information about how so many of our programs are approaching the work and trying to minimize barriers for students into the systems. The next big bucket is state leadership. We're required to allocate 10% of the total state allotment towards state leadership. And there are a couple of required uses for this. So $2 million is what our state allotment is for this. It includes between $60,000 and $150,000 for services that prepares students for non-traditional fields. We allocate the minimum amount to this in Maryland. It's $60,000. And when we say non-traditional fields, this is to promote welding with female students, the nursing profession to male students. It's completely gender-based, and we look at this based on essentially a difference, 75%, 25%. So, if nursing is 75% or greater a particular gender, then we would say it is considered a non-traditional field, where we would then allocate money to help increase awareness so that others move into this field. There's also a required up to 2% allocation for individuals in state institutions. This is, we fund the full 2% on this in Maryland, and this is money that goes to juvenile services and our Department of Corrections programming that lead to career programs. And so these are all managed by Department of Labor. And then we allocate the floor of $50,000 for recruiting of special populations into CTE programming. The state administration side of this, we require 5% to be allocated, so $1 million. But this is also where the state agency that receives Perkins dollars has to also match 5%. And so in order to gain access to the Perkins grant, Maryland State Department of Education also has to give $1 million of local funding in order to have that state match within the federal grant. And so within state leadership and state administration, this is where you operationalize the work. So many of the folks on my team are split funded between federal and state dollars. It's also the state leadership fund, where you remember last year we provided a funding floor So we had 14 LEAs that received less than $250,000 in federal money every year. Kent County receiving only like $31,000. Like, you can't build a workforce program with that amount of money. And so I used state leadership dollars that we have to increase the amount of funding for those 14 LEAs to $250,000. So they can now begin building and modernizing the programs that they have. And so that took a significant chunk of change from state leadership, but it's something that we knew was important in order to level the playing field for our LEAs across the state. So this is what our budget looks like. Not much difference from the budget last year, mainly because the work is driven by federal formulas.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, so just a reminder on next steps. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, let's all sign up to join 1 to 2 CTE ERT visits for next school year. We're asking that everyone sign up by next Friday. And this is also open to members of the public in these various categories. So please reach out to anyone who is interested. Also, after what you just heard from Richard, please remember that we want your input on the Perkins Reserve grant review. So sign up to join that review team. More details will be coming on this, but just want you to have in your mind that this is coming and we need everyone's input so that we can make these grants in the most effective way. And then a reminder that our next CTE committee meeting will be on November 20th from 2 to 4 p.m. So make sure you have that on your calendar. Let's see, Sarah, will we be getting another survey sign up? I think, do you mean for the Perkins Reserve Grant review and or for signing up for CTE expert review teams? I think the answer to both is yes. Tell me, Rachel, Richard, if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I know that
Yes.
last year there was like a 2-year sign up that went out.
I think it probably spanned the full school year, but yes, absolutely. We can make sure we share a link for both.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You
We'll
bet.
we'll get it in the follow-up materials. Great. Okay. Any other items of business before we move to adjourn? Okay, well, thank you all very much for leaning in on this today. Again, we'll come back to you with any feedback that we receive from the AIB on the deployment plan. And we're moving forward with these expert review team visits. So I look forward to seeing some of you on a visit or two in the coming year. With that, I will move that we adjourn. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're good. Good to see you all. Have a good rest of your summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.